Hai dil hai mushkil jeena yahan. And that's the problem. I'm talking about the gym. I can't live there anymore. It's driving me nuts. I've sleep deprived. I'm very sleepy. I've less than 4 hours sleep. I'll talk about that later. But the main point is I enter the gym. I open it at 6:10, 6:12 in the morning illegally. And I put everything on and all. So it's a long story. And then for the last 3 days, there are two big coffee flasks lying around with all the sticky coffee stuff on the. It's a small gym on one desk, which means I have to clean it and all that. I can't put my hand there. I can't put my stuff there because that sticky stuff. It's like semen. It sticks to you and it doesn't go. And then people know what you've done. You've been a bad boy, etc. So my point is, can we please not have coffee and tea? It's not a cafe. It's a gym. Please get your coffee and tea and get out. Coffee and tea is not to be served inside here. If I see that, you will be shot. But now let's remove the hostility from the moment and let's go and meet a wonderful man who's on the path to greatness and spiritual healing for the world. Because we have to stop killing animals. There's no way out. We have to stop. It must end now. He's been on the podcast before, and we literally begged him to come back. He said no 11 times, and the 12th time he was medicated heavily and agreed. Here he is, Mr. Varun Deshpande. Welcome to the show with a brand new background, I must say. I think it was last year sometime, towards the end of the year, we spoke. You will have no memory because you've been drinking heavily after that. But the background's changed. That's the first thing I've noticed.
Firstly, it was like March this year that we last spoke. So I don't. One of us has been drinking heavily, but it wasn't me.
Omicron. I must be having it. I'm feeling so good. It's a very weak strain.
Plausible deniability on the drinking. But anyway, so I think, by the way, since this is my third time on, I think I've earned the friend of the show. Right? Refer to me as friend of the show, Cyrus.
We have to give you something, Yeah, friend of the show. No, we have to felicitate you. There has to be like a grand opening and stuff. 3 times.
Absolutely. Man of infinite patience.
But Varun, remember, there's lots to talk about. If I go back in time and ask you a question from before, please slap me. I've got an early onset of Alzheimer's and dementia, as you probably know by now. Also, I want to apologize if I do fall asleep during this podcast. It's not because of you or the podcast per se. It might be the podcast per se, but I want to say that people will understand that. The point being that I'm really sleep deprived. And I'm going to be sleep deprived till Friday because I'm working on something and they're making me work in the night. And I wake up at 4:45 and walk dogs. At 4:33, Peter, my Saluki, licked me. But they don't lick. So he nosed me with a cold nose. And after that, I've been awake. So sorry to tell you. But you can do the podcast on your own. Never worry. You've got lots to say, Varun. We'll start with, since it was March, now that you rudely told me on my own show, corrected us from the onset and slapped me on the face. Has there been any, how do I put this politely? Has there been any growth in the movement, would you say? Fair question?
Yeah, lots. Firstly, let me say, so I was told that December, one of my team members told me a couple of weeks ago that December is the Friday of the year. So it's time to kind of have fun and relax and reflect and all of that stuff. And it hasn't worked out that way, obviously, for you because you're working around the clock. But I am here in my tie-dye t-shirt and just enjoying myself. So life is good.
Sorry to cut, but I like the phrase. Friday, December is the Friday of the year. The weekend, the party has started. You guys are so lucky. For us, it's just not a bloody month. Bills have to be paid. That's it.
No, I should say I'm also getting my ass kicked, but in a good way because a lot is happening in our space. To answer your question, like we've seen now, finally, we were talking about this last year. We were talking about this earlier this year. That we're expecting launches to actually happen. Where instead of these, in addition to these conversations that we're having, people can actually just try these products, these plant-based meats, these next generation products that are supposed to taste the same or better than the meat you already know and love, right? Without the same impacts on the planet. And we've started to see all of that happening. So companies like Ritesh and Janelia Deshmukh's Imagine Meats or
just tell us about that for a second. They confused me because I read this whole article on, and he was saying, I love meat, I can't live without meat, etc., etc. So what was he trying to? Was he saying that, and yet I will do this, or was he saying that I will eat meat while she's eating, switch to this meat substitute?
Yeah, it's a great question. The idea here is actually to give people who want the taste of meat, either they've been former meat eaters or current meat eaters, and don't want to have the same impact on the planet or on animals or on public health, etc. It gives them an option to switch. Because throughout history, we've been saying, eat broccoli, not beef, or eat chickpeas, not chicken. And that's a very poor substitute. It doesn't give you that. It doesn't make any sense, right? And also from a morality standpoint, who the hell am I to tell anyone else what to eat?
It's right? Say you tell someone date Cyrus Brocha instead of Priyanka Chopra. You can't do that. You can't just throw it out there. It just makes no sense from one end to the other.
So the idea
is cruel when you bring this up. It's really cruel that people should. It's almost like fascism. Oh, now you start eating French beans. That's why the Greens don't sell.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea here is to just give people something that literally feels like a simple switch, not a sacrifice. So if I'm, whether I'm American and eating at a backyard barbecue, or I'm Indian and we've got like a dinner going on, we've got like a biryani dinner going on or something, or even a wedding going on. The idea here is we need to have a simple switch. It needs to taste the same or better, and it needs to evoke all the same like fragrance, delectable like sizzle and all of that stuff. That's what food is, right? So we need to give people options that literally taste the same or
Yeah,
better.
because my biggest fear, and we've discussed this slightly before, is that you shouldn't have a sense of being, well, it's like a sacrifice. In which case, it's an emotive point where to save the planet or save animal killing, etc., you're doing it as a sense of, that morality issue, which which is a bit thin after some time because people just give up. My big worry is that, it's still seen like that. I want to quickly put you on the spot here and just tell me if I'm wrong, but it's not like the West, it's growing really that fast, is it? I mean, we all have relatives there. We all have brothers, sisters, aunts, and uncles, and it's not like they're eating, exposed to that. But what I'm saying is, doesn't seem to be a revolution yet.
Oh, I mean, look, it's definitely very mainstream now in places like the US, right? So I don't know where your aunts and uncles live, but the idea here is, I mean,
That's sweet.
no, no, but
Those
even
fucking
in
rednecks.
no, no,
Yeah,
the point that I was about to make is actually in all parts of the US, for instance, like there's Burger King everywhere, right? So there are
exactly.
these products that are available at places like Burger King. So the Impossible Whopper
So
is
I go to a
available at.
Burger King, well, because I honestly I love Burger King. Can I just endorse Burger King? We love you. Please be a brand on our show. No, I do. I don't explain this to you. This is something that I rekindle with my kids when we started going abroad in the old days when you could travel. So whether it's a Thailand or a Dubai or the West proper or America or wherever, just see a Burger King and see we have to pay respects and go and eat there. So if I went there and I like the double Whopper, which is the famous one that I like, and I asked for that, can I get the meatless version? And would
Yes.
I be close to the
Yeah, yeah.
original?
So in all 7,200 locations of Burger King in North America, you can
Wow.
go and you can find the Impossible Whopper, which is made by a company called Impossible Foods. It's one of the companies in this space. They're one of the largest ones. And all the marketing material, to our point from earlier, says 100% Whopper, 0% beef. So the idea here is it tastes the same as your Whopper. It just happens to be made from something that's not beef. And by the way, Burger King is doing this globally, right? So in North America, it's
Will we get
Impossible.
it here?
Uh,
It's right near my
can
office where I'm sitting.
can
I'm like five
can
minutes away.
can neither confirm nor deny. Maybe soon. Maybe
But
soon
but
we'll have
but in the
products.
future we
Yeah,
should, right? Why
yeah.
would we not?
In the near to medium term future, actually, it's going to happen in 2022. There will be products
See,
launched in
Varun,
fast food India in 2022.
why can't we offer this gratis, a couple of these, like, the people on this show, for example, or we'll pay for it. We give three. I mean, if the option is there, especially with fast food, which is so easily available and manageable, and we ask three of our listeners who are interested, people like me or hardcore meat guys, I mean, we have plenty of them, and you put their hand up and say, look, I'll taste it and I'll give you a proper, uh, absolutely non-jaundiced review. How about that? let's let's
I
let's
want
just
that.
do that.
That makes complete sense. And you know what? If you've hit upon a really important point. And in fact, the fourth time I come on the show, let's do that. I think it makes complete sense.
Yeah, we can do it
I'm
live,
serious.
literally. Send it to, sorry.
Let's do it. See, as an example, we work with Amazon Fresh. We work with all of these people across the spectrum to kind of get these products out, start more companies, etc.,
Mhm.
etc. We work with Amazon Fresh, which is Amazon's like grocery delivery arm in India, to just brief them on this space. And after that, they actually launched one of the companies that already exists in India called Blue Tribe Foods. Amazon Fresh offered a 97% discount in Mumbai on Blue Tribe Foods
Wow,
products online. So it
that's
was a
enough.
it
I
was a
give up
Diwali
meat.
offer. It was a Diwali offer, but the idea is, look, like I might have some barrier to trying these products. Maybe I consider them too expensive, or I haven't heard of them, etc. But people like Amazon Fresh or people like yourself who have a reach with consumers and who are talking about these issues, right? We should be doing things that lead to this kind of category awareness, like what's happening in the space. And also the second point that you made, which is we need very, very clear reviews so the companies can get better. It's really important to remember what we're talking about here is food science. So it can get much better very fast. You have
Absolutely.
executives from the likes of Nestle, Unilever globally who've worked in food for 20 years are saying we have never seen a product category get better faster than this one. So it's possible to improve it much, much more, much faster, unlike chickens or cows, which have been a stagnant technology for the last 2000
I'll give you
years.
another example, a parallel universe, if I may, which is I've recently been diagnosed with diabetes. Good news, it's come down drastically in just 15 days. But so trying stevia, carrying it with me literally, so that if I, yeah, late night stuff and you want coffee, etc., just put the stevia in. and I must tell you, the tastes are all good. No problem. So in sense of sugar substitute, if you grew up with a sugar tooth and a sweet tooth,
Yeah,
etc., you really have a
yeah,
problem with anything you think is not exactly sugar. It's already, a bit of that imposter thing, and whatever you people will come up with that is 99% there, 98% there. The fact of the matter is the non-jaundice report is from the person purely on taste. And I got to give stevia, a thumbs up. I mean, you don't even need much. It's just a small amount gives you that. I tried it in a lassi the other day. Just put a little bit in a lassi, ask them to make it like neutral, no sugar, and boom, put it in because I want that sweet taste, and oof. I mean, so likewise, do you think we're headed in the right direction in that sense? You yourself were a non-vegetarian. Um,
yeah.
I mean,
No, I
let,
remember, by the way, I used to love eating meat. I grew up eating meat. I remember what everything tastes like. I remember, like, pomfret versus like bangda versus all kinds of different fish and different kinds of chicken and all of that stuff, right?
sounds like a
I
reality show. Pomfret
no,
versus Bhangra coming soon.
no, but that's what we need. We need to be able to offer alternatives for every type of meat dish with every type of meat that people love eating all over the world. And that's a long journey, but it's happening. Just like you said with stevia, it's happening in the sugar substitutes market. It's happening here. I really do think like 20 years from now, we'll be looking back and we'll say, why did we persist as long as we did? I think it
Okay,
just makes
I'll put it this way. For people like us, a lot of us who are in the middle of the line, as in we really don't want to hurt the environment. Deep down, I really don't want animals to be killed. I'm not, sounds hypocritical, but I really don't. And I'm thinking people like us, all we need to do is start with the beginning of the next generation in the sense that whether it's a Burger King or Chinese food with whatever, please bring people into the show. It's very informal, no worries. So whatever it is and whoever it is, I'm seeing from the right at the beginning, when the child in your family, the next generation starts walking, they're exposed to this food firstly, and in a way that is part of your culture. See, growing up, our cultures are very non-vegetarian where I come from, so that's a big issue. But I'm saying we can change that. It's still non-vegetarian, but it's this, and you got the protein content from a nutrition point of view, etc. Blah blah blah. You have all that formalization to fall back on as well. So maybe it's a generational shift which will take its time for it to become authentic. As in, there's a
yeah.
yeah.
So, I mean, look, young people, as you might expect, the early adopter for this from like rigorous research is people like you, right? As you know, generally they tend to skew younger, urban, upwardly mobile. They've seen the Game Changers documentary, or they have some inherent like feeling about animal
Yeah,
welfare,
everyone's
environment.
seen that damn documentary. Yeah.
Yeah, but the point you made earlier is, look, I can watch Game Changers, I can be totally convinced, but if the alternative is not good, I might try it for a couple of weeks and then I'll switch back, right? Because what's the option? So here, what we're trying to do is catalyze that suite of alternatives across every type of thing you might possibly want to eat. Maybe initially you swap it in a couple of times a week instead of like the 10 times you're eating meat or whatever. Twice you'll eat this other thing. As it gets better, as it gets cheaper, etc. I mean, more and more people will be able to do that, and that's the point. I mean, that's how we're trying to build this out, but it's going to take a long time to get there.
Let's stir the pot a little bit for a second. I'm in a mischievous mood. We're finding that vegan culture and vegans per se a little aggressive and a little, if you like, I'm talking in the West as well, very demanding and very clear in what is right or wrong and looking down on the others, etc. So you have a lot of animosity from vegan groups versus non-vegan groups, including people trolling left, right, and center for any small amount. So I'm just thinking maybe that's the wrong way to go. And since this is the parallel universe to veganism, um, what would be the right way to go? What would be the right PR exercise in terms of changing? Because what you're doing is a real revolution. We've said this before on the 22 times you've appeared, but that's what it is. It's got to be a revolution, literally, albeit a passive one.
Yeah. I mean, so for us, we don't brand ourselves as vegan. We're not necessarily, we, like you said, we see ourselves as parallel to that whole movement, but we're not getting dragged down into those sort of culture wars between like vegans and non-vegans. The right way to go is, as you rightly said, inclusive, right? Make sure that everyone feels like they have a stake, pun very much intended, in this future of food, and we're not.
Ooh,
When
Varun.
Yes, thank you.
you, you
I'll take
come
my
down to
award.
our mediocre level today. Why? Go on.
I'll take my award now. But the
Yeah.
idea here is to make sure that it's totally inclusive, right? And people aren't feeling alienated on the basis of morality. We have to take morality off the plate. Again, pun intended, right? The idea here is to just serve up the future in ways that people feel like it's easily accessible. They can try it, they can swap it in, and then eventually, hopefully, they can try to see how they can replace more and more of their meals with it, etc. And all of that stems from really great foods. It doesn't stem from like shoving this morality down people's throats. Like I said, people have been saying eat chickpeas, not chicken, for a very long time. It just hasn't worked. Like just pragmatically, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, but let's move a little bit now to the government's role, and I don't just mean the Indian government, which loves Munawar Faruqi, my cousin. I'm talking about all the governments here because sometimes I'm wondering whether there's subsidies in place. Are they look? They're very clear with the environment, at least the West and us for that matter, barring China. Most countries at least talk the talk, where they're going to give you subsidies, they're going to help you with the green revolution. I mean, you're talking. Look at the big three in America; they all talk about it all the time. The corporates, I mean, Amazon, etc., Tesla. So how important would that role be in terms of both local India as well as from a world footing, in terms of them, the government saying, okay, guys, here's the carrot, I'm dangling it, go this way.
Yeah, it's a great point, and we need that, right? We've seen it in other industries like solar energy, electric cars, etc. And actually, we're reaping the benefits as a country from it, right? Those industries are going to create huge amounts of jobs and economic growth and all of that. And
Yeah.
as you rightly said, sustainability gains, all of which the government cares about. These are things that governments should care about, and they do care about. Actually, what's happened since we last spoke in terms of that side of things is considerable. There's been like this smart protein space race of sorts that's heating up in other parts of the world. So we're seeing Canada putting out this like road to 25 billion. We think we can create $25 billion industry in this.
Papaji, just can you go back? What is smart protein? Sorry to be so naive, but what is that?
Yeah, no, great question. This entire space of alternative proteins, so whether it's plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy, or fermentation-derived proteins, or cultivated meat that's made directly from animal cells, and of course, those are more futuristic categories. They'll take more time to come to market. Right now, most of what we're talking about is purely the plant-based side because that's stuff you can eat and try in the market. But this entire space, we're calling it smart protein. It's smarter because of all the reasons we've discussed before. Far fewer like land, water, greenhouse gases, all of that stuff. Far fewer resource burdens in that sense. Much fewer implications for the environment, public health, because you don't need to use antibiotics and you don't need to, crowd all these animals close together, which might result in zoonotic diseases and pandemics and stuff like that. So this is just a smarter way to make protein. And that's the idea here. And that's why we're calling it smart protein. So, I mean, we're seeing a lot of this heat up in other parts of the world. The government of Denmark announced a national plan to support this space with all kinds of incentives, all kinds of stuff going on. Israel is very much ahead of the game. Singapore's ahead of the game. Canada is like seeing this as a major piece of their economic growth goals. So we need to actually bring India to the table here. We might risk losing out in ways that we've lost out in other industries if we don't do it as fast as possible. So we're trying to get that going. And some conversations with government have been quite positive in the last years, but especially in this year of 2021. So we hope to see stuff
considering
coming up.
they're safeguarding the cow, they can extend it to a few more breeds beyond the bovine industry as well. But I want to get back to America for a second because I don't. I know it's really mean to point fingers at Tesla or anybody else because I suppose whatever you do is enough. You can't, because it's easy to be a critic. And when they say they're working from a green space, etc., it's obviously limited and there's carbon footprint, etc. But why aren't they hand in hand with this? Because these are all parallel movements. If you look, I mean, from the point of view where you're coming from, the perspective is exactly the same. You're talking food, they're talking other things, but they're all linked together. Whether it's using solar energy, etc., etc., it's all coming from the same space. So I can't understand why the food revolution is not getting the same sort of impetus that the others are getting, or people think it's really cool and hip to discuss solar work or environmental saving from another point of view, but don't get into the food business per se.
Cyrus, you're one of the first people, seriously, you're one of the first people in history to talk about this. That's the thing. So we will get there. It's just, those industries are the culmination of decades of work. Solar energy has taken about 40 years to get to where it is now. And you're right. Look, as a comparison, it's not even close in terms of how much attention and support they're getting. As an example, last year, in 1 year, solar energy received $500 billion with a B dollars of investment overall. And in additional, 32 billion with a B dollars of public R&D funding. Even after 30, 40 years, it's getting $32 billion of public R&D funding. Because why? Because we need to make it continuously better, continuously cheaper, scale it across the world. By the way, in the most remote parts of the world, we need to start scaling up these solar microgrids and all that stuff, right? In history, Smart Protein has received about $1 billion or far less than $1 billion of R&D funding, right? Far, far less than that. And then $10 billion of total funding on like the investment side. And that's in history, right? So we're comparing
this is across the globe or America?
Across the globe, right? So we will get there, but this is one of, I mean, on a scale of history, this is one of the first conversations that is ever taking place, right? You and I have talked multiple times, but this is still the very beginning of the industry. So we will get there.
it's just the stepsister treatment, sisterly treatment that seems to be meted out, but it's the same fight. It's exactly the same fight. It's just that you're, pigeonholing one area and they're pigeonholing another area, but it's the same fight about sustainability, about making it green, about the environment, because it's ultimately it's about keeping your globe, preserving it. That's the bottom
Yeah,
line. I mean, you can just say it in 3 words, and this is all
yeah.
parts of it. But here's my question: what happens with that big meat lobby? Because you got Texas, you got beef, you got places like Argentina, Australia. I mean, New Zealand. They need. I mean, that's the huge industry for them. So I was thinking, isn't that going to be a problem always? Because they've got that, and that industry drives those countries to some extent. One of the big industries of that country, of those countries. So how do you deal with that?
It's a great question. So look, there's two sides to this. One is the actual big meat companies and the brands that they own. From their perspective, they are meat providers, they're protein providers. They don't necessarily stipulate that that meat has to come from an animal. Obviously, currently, animal meat is the major part of their business. But 9 out of the top 10 US meat producers have already invested in or started their own line of plant-based meat. This is true all over the world. We're seeing big meat producers and food producers like Nestle, Unilever, who are not necessarily meat producers, but also big meat producers like, I'll rattle off some names here: Smithfield, Tyson Foods, Hormel, all of these guys that do like a huge, huge trade. I mean, totals of hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in meat have all invested in this space now, right? So they're getting into it. And they say things like, if we can make meat without the animal, why wouldn't we? We are just a protein or a meat company. We don't stipulate that it has to come from an animal. The other side of it is what you said, which is the farmers and the livestock ranchers, etc. For them, this is a bit of a threat in that respect, right? So I think the conversation has matured in the last couple of years, where instead of only trying to shut it down, now the question is about, okay, how do we make sure that this transition is sustainable? It doesn't disadvantage existing industries. If there's like a labor transition that is a just transition, and all of this is good, by the way. These are all mature conversations beyond like trying to shut down a new thing.
Varun, call me a coward, but I always think that the solution has to be inclusive. Always. There's no way. Otherwise, what happens with lobbies, and we just look at the world's history of business and commerce, you can't do that, because once you do that, you poke the bear sort of, and then just there's an effect which you can't control, cascading effect, if I may say so. So
And
I'm just
you're
looking
right.
from a maybe cowardly point of view that everyone has to come to the table and say, okay, what's in it for me? That's it. Sometimes maybe to be
100%.
clinical is the best way.
100%, 100%. And look, I'm telling you this as the leader of a group that actively advances alternative proteins, right? Smart proteins, which is an alternative to what these folks are doing. And I agree with you 100% from a pragmatic standpoint, and also because we actually need each other. So we're seeing actually now there is a lot of synergy and a lot of advantage to these traditional groups investing in this space, and I mean including the farmers, right? So there's an opportunity for them to grow the inputs for plant-based meat. There's an opportunity for them to use their distribution networks to get food out to people. So for example, in India, you look at any of the plant-based dairy companies, they're quite expensive now, right? Buying an oat milk is expensive as hell. And also, it doesn't get to you the same way that your regular doodh does. Your regular doodhwala comes in the morning and gets you your
Correct.
stuff. That's magic, right? We should be piggybacking on the same distribution network, right? And that's what we are starting to see happen. Initially, it'll be companies like Amazon Fresh, Big Basket, as I mentioned, but soon we'll see these dairy companies, these dairy cooperatives also getting into this space. It's what's happened internationally. This is supplemental income for them. This is
It's like
something
a
that can be.
Kirana shop and Amazon and etc. etc.
Yep.
But let's now come to the land of Ahimsa. Apparently, it's a country nearby, close to us as we speak. You would think that the way this present government is sitting, very clearly making all the posturing and noises in terms of environment, especially when our man travels abroad and chest beating about how we are going to do this, that, and the other, and by giving numbers and figures, 2034 we'll be energy self-sufficient and green by 41, and by August 2043 and a half will be, well, meatless. But they haven't said that, but I'm just saying they're throwing things up there. Don't you expect a little bit more from the kind of rhetoric that's already in place, considering you're on the same team in this case?
It'll happen. And to be clear, look, we don't leverage the ahimsa argument, or we don't lean on that argument related to what you mentioned earlier with beef and all of those things. I think frankly that's just again getting dragged down into those culture wars. The strongest arguments that we can make are, this is something that we have to do. We can't mortgage our future. I mean, I want to have kids. I want my kids and grandkids to live on this planet and have access to even better landscapes than I do. Hopefully, we'll be able to restore some of these landscapes that have been degraded over the last decades. But there's also a huge economic argument to be made, right? So since we last spoke, actually, we've been doing a very in-depth study with Deloitte, which is another one of those big names that carries a lot of weight with governments, right? So we've been doing a study with them that shows how many jobs this can create and how much value it can create for farmers and how much export income and stuff like that. And we will be leaning on those arguments. The government is receptive to those for sure. So I think, it's possible the next time we talk, we'll have some good announcements to make in terms of government partnerships and things like that. But yeah, we need them to be a pretty edgy and innovative and visionary on this, in the same way that countries like Singapore and Israel have been.
But not to say that because they're smaller and more homogeneous, I mean, we'll leave that argument aside. My only big worry is, and we've already discussed this, so I won't go back to it, is that when you create the job spaces and then this whole environment, which is new, there's also closing of a lobby in a sense, industries that are providing whatever. So we have to look at that also. As we already mentioned, from a pragmatic clinical point of view, we want a logistical supply for everybody on a table, so everyone goes back from the meeting with something in their pocket. So I think that's fair. Well, last question before we go into break, I'm dying to ask you: is there any mantri? There must be someone on a personal level in power who sort of shouts your, sings your song, and is in the same team.
So we've been very grateful to have the support of multiple members of parliament. So Honorable Pinaki Mishra from Odisha, who's, by the way, very progressive. His constituency, Puri, was recently in the papers a couple of months ago for being the first constituency in the country to have drinking tap water. So you can drink the tap water in Puri, which is really...
Wow, like in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. Like, water, sanitation and hygiene is a pretty, important area for India in general. So, he's a very progressive MP. He's done a lot for us in terms of advancing other people's understanding of the space. Another one is Honorable Poonam Mahajan, who's from Bandra. You might know her.
Yeah.
So she's been very supportive as well. We have a lot of progressive government ministries who, again, it's individuals in these ministries, but we've worked with Invest India, which again is like more of a new age investment facilitation agency, but also the likes of Ministry of Food Processing Industries, Ministry of Science and Technology. This is like we are building ground game with different people in different ministries, and I think it's all going to come together in some kind of mission for smart protein soon.
Especially the names you're taking are relatively young, and I'm using that loosely, relatively young, and that's very important, I think, because they have got the answers. Perhaps it is more difficult to get the older generation to listen beyond the point of agreeing with you and doing nothing. So maybe, the more dynamic sort of solutions will come from the younger lot, I hope. Again, relatively.
Before we go to break, though, there is also Mr. Piyush Goyal, right? Who was he was in power, he was in railways, he was in a lot of different things, and now he's a commerce minister in the cabinet. He was recently in Bangalore with one of our collaborators there, and they talked to him about this. And he said, look, like it makes complete sense. We should be setting up like a biotech city in Bangalore. It can create so many jobs. We've done it in like pharmaceuticals, for example, before, the largest vaccine manufacturers in this country, right? So I think as you make these economic arguments, it becomes clear to people that, look, this is an area that we can't afford to miss out on, or it's a huge opportunity. So let's move in this direction. And if people in the cabinet are seeing the value of it, I'm sure people all over the government will as well. And like you said, we just have to make sure that it sits alongside other industries and has a just transition if there is indeed a transition.
And I mean, Piyush, I love Piyush. He's great. And if Piyush gives you the Piyush that you need to go forward, and hopefully if he goes back to his last cabinet posting or the ones before where he was right in the top 4, that'll be fantastic because he's going to be one of the real powerful figures in government. But you know how politics are, it's up and down there as well. So that's Piyush Goyal, name to remember, Poonam Mahajan, and Mr. Mishra of Puri, who's given us, for folks who've just tuned in, amazingly, according to Varun, if you go to Puri, you can drink water from the tap just like you would in Paris. So Puri will have a French accent when you pronounce it. It'll be Pure. Pure brings us to our break. And the young Punjabi boy who runs this show called Silvery, who may or may not be awake. That guy and timing. Silvery, please join us. You feasted on too much. You've been feasting on meat while we're talking. Mutton, chicken, etc. You stop that, bro. That's not right. Varun's not happy.
Sure. Varun, I have a question. Did you already talk about the cost of impossible meats compared to regular meats? Will that become better?
Yeah. It's a great question. And you know what? During the pandemic, at least the large international companies that have a lot of scale and have been able to even scale up more, and they've raised, Impossible Foods, I think 2 weeks ago announced another $500 million of fundraising. So for them to build new factories is not that much of a hassle in terms of capital availability, at least. During the pandemic, within the last 2 years, both Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, the two largest companies in this space, have announced like, here's a 20% slash in price. Here's another 15% slash in price. They're seeing the opportunity here, especially during the pandemic. Because by the way, during the pandemic, there was a meat shortage in places like North America because they had to shut down slaughterhouses because those slaughterhouses were amplification points for COVID. Right, the slaughterhouses themselves are quite filthy. You've got all this animal slaughter and like feces.
Let's not describe it. Yeah.
And the workers there are crammed together and it's just not the best condition. So they became amplification points for COVID. So during this time, Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat did all of this like promotion and they slashed their prices and all of that stuff. So it's definitely possible, Antariksh. See, the idea is the inputs here are very cheap, right? They're plants at the end of the day. As long as we can figure out the supply chain, you should be able to get to cheaper than animal meat over time. It might take some time to get there and a lot of scale to get there, but we will get there, I think.
I've got some very radical ways to change people's minds. I'm saying people should learn to eat themselves. First, cut some part of your own body and eat it. And then you sort of know what it's really like to show some empathy in the case of killing or slaughtering. So I think that's the kind of movement. I want your new ministers, Piyush Goyal, to become the next Prime Minister of India and ask us, each Indian citizen, to sit there and cut themselves and taste. You can use chutney and pickle because that's our culture. You have to have a char with everything.
But what would you start with though? If you had to do that,
Me?
Cyrus.
But you see, you've got to cut areas which you can cut, right? Because you'll be, I'm a righty, so I'll have to
like a tip of the finger or something like that.
Well, that's too small. I would go for a slice of the hamstring. That's where, I mean, traditionally, that's what you'd be cooking.
That's his way of putting in that he's been doing his leg workouts. And his legs
Yeah.
I do my leg workouts with great intensity. I just don't have good genetics. That's very unfair when people point that out to me all the time. It's so unfair, really. Yeah, I say, come and work out with me. Tuesday quads.
Huh? How did that happen to you? You're Parsi. You should have good genetics. Like, for me, it's...
No, so in fact, the calves come from my dad, which are very thin. Unfortunately, very sad.
I'm so sorry. I apologize on behalf of our South Asian genetics.
Yeah. He gave me his anxiety and the carbs. I'm very grateful. It's a wonderful gift.
But your suggestion is taken on file. We have our visioning team retreat at the beginning of the next year. So I'll put this down as one of the things we should discuss. Get people to eat themselves as a way of
It's not as ridiculous as it sounds. You know, I mean, literally, you need like a Daniel coming to justice and saying, about time. Let's take one for the other side now. It's been goals scored only from one end of the football field. But firstly, it's a great courage to come up with something like that because you're fighting such a force. But in a sense, you can see there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's just a longer process for you, and it's rightly a longer process because, like I said, the next generation has to make a complete change. Like a metamorphosis has to happen. Silvery, that's the word for next Monday. You can start now.
Okay,
Metamorphosis.
But I can't look it up in the internet. Damn it! So that'll be cheating.
I trust you. Yeah.
Okay,
Honestly,
cool.
that's our
I'll
thing.
figure it out.
Don't worry. Yeah. Sorry. Shall we go on to the AMAs?
Yes, absolutely. There are some quite a lot of questions for Varun. This first one comes in from Shovik Bakchi. He says, non-vegetarian people have the theory that if they don't eat meat, there will be a disbalance in the food chain. What are your views on that?
Not a complete moronic point. There is something in that.
It's a great question, and look, it stems from our not necessarily knowing where our food comes from generally, and that's not something that we would expect anyone to know. Where most of our meat comes from, the vast majority, by the way, more than 99.9% of our meat globally comes from what's known as industrial factory farming, right? So that is not natural. You're not eating the Kadaknath chicken that was roaming around the jungles of Andhra Pradesh that's been hunted and cut for you, right?
That's an excellent point.
What you are eating is 70 billion land animals that are raised for meat only for that purpose, and about 1 to 3 trillion fish or seafood that are used for meat every year. And it's crazy, right? So we actually have to use a huge amount of land, over 75% of all agricultural land on this planet, to grow crops for or to graze those animals, right? Or those fish, right? And we have to, use huge amounts of water, emit huge amounts of greenhouse gases. This entire sector causes more climate change than all the emissions from the entire transportation sector combined. So the way we're eating now is not.
Is that so?
Yep. It's not in balance right now. The way we're eating now is not in balance. So actually what we're trying to do is get back to balance. So we will be able to actually do things like no longer encroach as much on the Amazon, right? So you must have seen before the current crisis that has persisted for nearly 2 years, there was another crisis that you might remember. The Amazon was literally on fire. There was a lot of the lungs of the world are on fire, etc. A lot of that is because farmers are encroaching on the Amazon, right, to grow crops like soy to feed to animals, and then eat those animals as as meat. So chickens and cows, etc. So what we are doing actually is restoring a balance that hasn't existed for some time.
What a great answer, and a point to note here, that famous saying we grew up with is lots of fish in the sea, especially like when you lose your girlfriend, etc. Well, that's true. 3 trillion fish.
and
Human
not,
made. Human made. What is about human manufactured farm
yeah.
fish?
And not that much longer, right? That's the problem. So like about 93% of all fish stocks in the sea, like places where we go to get fish, are at maximal capacity. About one third of them are actively declining because we're overfishing, right? And then so what is the solution to this? It's let's farm fish instead. But when you farm fish instead, you have to feed them a bunch of antibiotics to keep them healthy, and they get a bunch of diseases, and those diseases go out into the actual ocean. So look, there is no perfect solution here. If we have to live on this planet, the best way to do that is there's like a 3-point solution here. Let's transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, right? Once that is done, we can look at electric vehicles really, really seriously, because obviously we have to get electricity from energy. And then the third thing is, what the hell do we do about meat and animals? Because we are really killing the planet at this point in terms of how we consume. So that's really an important thing. I want to address another point, by the way, because I don't think we actually talked about what it is that I do. And there's a bunch of questions here asking, hey, can we just get some information about who this guy is? So my name is
I,
Varun Deshpande.
Varun, that must be my family members. I'm sorry about that. Just ignore it.
Yeah, no, there you go. Bruce Wayne. Hi, Bruce. Big fan of your work. I actually think you could do a lot more if you just considered like giving away the money a little bit more efficiently than like spending it on bat wings and stuff like that. But that's fine. Everyone's got their own.
He doesn't eat them. It's an aesthetic choice. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely don't eat the bats, right? Please don't eat the bats. That's what gets us in situations like we are in now. But I am not a spinner for KKR. That's very good. I'm not a spinner for KKR. I'm horrendous at cricket. But
You are a spinner. You're spinning the right things, though. Go ahead.
I run an organization called the Good Food Institute India. We're part of a global network of non-profit.
Was I supposed to say that? I'm so sorry. Today's guest, folks, is Varun Deshpande. He's the MD at Good Food Institute Asia. The second season of his podcast has started, named Feeding 10 Billion. Get on it right now, Varun.
Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate the introduction. So we advance the space of alternative protein or smart protein, right? So we work with business, science, and policy to really create this space from scratch in India. We work with entrepreneurs, with universities, government, etc., to really build this new sunrise industry. And I think you've been listening to the rest of what I'm saying. There's a huge opportunity here for us to get major sustainability gains, public health gains, vastly reduce the risk of future pandemics, etc., and then also create a new green industry which can create a lot of jobs and economic growth.
And for those who want to propagate these theories, just remember Varun is not trying to hit you with a stick. He's not one of those violent right-wing liberals. He's just trying to point out, look, this is the way forward. That's it. And I think that's the only message that's ever going to, actually go through generations. Because there's no point trying to force, because people just won't respond. They have to just slowly. It's like an awakening, which I hope, and I think it will happen. The moment I find the taste to be almost good enough, I'm gone. That's it. I'll be one of Varun's converts, for if you want to use that word loosely. Yes, sir. Next.
Varun, I have, maybe this might seem like a stupid question, but
Yes, it
you
is.
run the okay, cool. You run the Good Food Institute. Do people who end up working at the Good Food Institute are mostly like, are they more vegetarians, so skewed towards veganism or
That's a
something,
great
than
question.
non-vegetarians?
So
That's a great
we have all kinds of people at GFI India and Asia and globally. But yes, of course, they tend to skew towards people who are already converted for sustainability reasons or otherwise. In India, most of the people that work for us come in for a combination of they care about sustainability or they care about really cool food innovation. So they come in as food scientists and they see that this space is really exciting, right? And then some people also care about animal welfare. But for whatever reason, in the India team, we don't seem to have. In the GFI India team, we don't seem to have a lot of animal folks. In places like the US and Europe, where kind of that non-profit space is a lot better developed on the animal welfare side, we have a lot of animal welfare folks there as well. But the theory of change is the same everywhere. We are all independent organizations doing different things. Like the goal in India will be slightly different than it is in the US, right? Like we have this whole agricultural biodiversity here. We can work with farmers. There's a lot that we can do here that we can't do in the US and vice versa. So it's a different organization, but the theory of change is the same everywhere. It's literally, it can be stated as tastes the same or better and costs the same or less. That's where we have to get to. It's as simple.
No, but Silvery, I think your point is well made. I doff my hat to you when I touch your feet and lick them. Because if, say, a Kunal, like say if someone from my subculture was saying this whole thing and saying this is the meat that we've made, taste it because I like it, my chances of believing of once you understand that that person is from your sort of palate area, it makes a huge difference. So I get what he's saying completely, and that's why, Varun, you're
Yeah.
important to me, because I know you have the same background as us, and being a hardcore non-vegetarian growing up, etc., 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 you can't sell us rubbish. You can't,
You should
because you know that.
you should see some of the notes that I provide, Cyrus, to some of the entrepreneurs that send me stuff for like tasting and feedback and stuff. Because we work with them from every stage of their life cycle, so I see every iteration. Some of the notes I send back are pretty brutal. Like, this sucks. Like, we really need to like get a lot better on the juiciness or this that, like the bite, it's horrible, like blah blah, that stuff like that. And frankly, a lot of the entrepreneurs in our space are like you and me. I would say even more you, because they continue to eat meat, right? They just want to make meat better. They want to upgrade meat, and that's the idea. And by the way, there's a quality argument to be made here. I know that you might be eating high quality meat. A lot of your listeners might be eating high quality meat and going to restaurants that serve high quality meat, etc. But I would argue, meat it's not a standardized product, right? Like in terms of how high quality it is. So many people are eating very poor quality meat. And so if we can standardize the quality of it, and eventually it might take a long time in terms of cost, but I think we should have like bluefin tuna available for everyone. That currently costs like $500 per pound by weight. So it's a very luxury product. It's like Wagyu beef or whatever. But why can't we have it available for everyone? And I mean everyone, right? So if I go to an urban slum in Mumbai, currently they're telling me, to Antriksh's point, Silvery's point about cost. Currently they're telling me that a family of 4 is eating one mutton meal a week for 460 rupees. If they could, they would eat 2 mutton meals a week for 920, 3 mutton meals a week for 1,380, but they can't afford it. That's the limiting factor. I think we should and can get to a point where the supply of these alternatives is so good and the taste is so good that we should have bluefin tuna available for everyone, and chicken and all of the things, obviously. But I mean, that's the bar we should set.
But then you're going to wipe out the vegetarian industry in a sense, because you've created a third industry, which is neither meat nor veg. And that sort of is everything. And then what the hell? Who's going to buy the greens? You're killing the greens. You're saving the earth, but you're killing the greens.
You still should have your side of like beautiful sauteed spinach or whatever, like mushrooms and everything. You should have all of it, right? Like we don't compete with the vegetables, obviously. You should please still eat your veggies. Don't just eat plant-based meats and not eat your veggies.
Let's take the analogy of meat further. Let's bring it to women and carry on the conversation. No, I'm just kidding. Please, Varun, be very careful. Back off immediately. Silvery, you are ready to talk. I can see from your dirty smile.
Yeah. No. I have another question.
God, create me an artificial woman. They're out there. You just have to go to Amazon. It's right there.
Okay.
Sorry.
One more is so currently though, Varun, how close in nutrient value like is it close enough to the nutrient value of
I think
like
that's the best selling point.
That is okay. That is the best selling point. Okay.
Let him answer. Sorry, Varun.
Yeah, no, that's right. So look, different products will do different things. I'm also seeing questions, by the way, about like I tried a specific product, it tasted terrible, etc. So I think just as the taste of different foods and different companies will be different, even from a nutrition standpoint, there'll be something slightly different. But I think all the entrepreneurs understand, and we understand that you have to match the nutrition also, right? And by the way, there's work to do on that front, because matching nutrition is not just a matter of matching the macronutrients, that is protein, carbs, and fat. That's relatively easily done because this is a food science initiative. You can get exactly what you want. In fact, you can get better than that it's all cholesterol free, it doesn't have hormones, antibiotics, etc. Right? But we also have to go a little bit farther in terms of what are known as the micronutrients. So vitamin A, iron, zinc, folic acid. If you look at an egg, for example, it's considered a powerhouse of nutrition because it has all of these micronutrients like choline and vitamin A, vitamin E, all of that stuff, right? We have to get there. That can be expensive. So I think it's going to take some time, but there's an opportunity here to, I would say, catalyze an affordable, sustainable supply of nutrients at every level of the socioeconomic pyramid. We just need support and we need to get there faster.
Varun, if you want to take some more chat questions that you've noticed, please go ahead. We don't have to wait for me and Silvery. So
but I have another great question though in the meantime. Aditya Sharda has asked, after bigger players come in for mass production, do you think lab-grown meat could go the same way as the genetically modified meat with a fear of chemicals and enzymes pumped in?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I think so. Lab-grown meat, by the way, what's referred to as lab-grown meat is that third category I was talking about, Cyrus. So cultivated meat. So you essentially farm the cells directly instead of farming the animals. It's biologically identical to meat. And just as it's food, it's subjective. So in the morning, I might want something plant-based. In the evening, I could want a cultivated steak or whatever. This category, though, happens to be much farther away from cost parity and market than plant-based, right? However, Singapore just approved, this time last year, they approved for the first time in history ever, any country, the sale of cultivated meat. So it sounds like science fiction, but you can actually go ahead and order cultivated chicken bites, and that is biologically 100% chicken, but it is not. It is made without slaughtering the animal. They basically took the cells and they produced it, and the animal went ahead and did whatever it was doing, running around, playing. Whatever. I don't know what chickens do, right? But anyway, so to answer your question, see, this doesn't have to be GMO, right? At least in India, GMO is not. It's a non-starter, so you don't have to use GMO technologies. But we have to get really good at science communication. It's a great point. We need people like. There was another question that you just highlighted. I think about Singapore supporting the space. They are supporting it in various ways. The food regulator in Singapore is communicating with consumers about how these products are produced. They're creating this whole ecosystem of academics and the regulator themselves and the companies on communicating how this stuff is produced. What's really interesting here is companies internationally, especially the larger ones that are actually getting to the point where they can start manufacturing these cultivated meats, which, as I said, is a little far from market in terms of cost parity. They are saying, come into our factory, watch how it is produced. I will show you how clean this process is, right? By the way, we call it cultivated meat now. We used to call it clean meat just a couple of years before, but I think the entire industry, all of us decided that that's a bit of an inflammatory term. Basically, you're calling conventional meat dirty if you call something else clean. But it's a good comparison because you can see how clean it is. And actually, if you ask a conventional meat company, can I go and see how your meat is produced? They will not allow you to do that, right? In fact, there are explicitly what are known as ag-gag laws that prevent people from talking about some of the how conventional meat is produced. So look, we don't focus on that side of things. We focus on how positive this can be. But it's worth noting that if companies are saying, come in, view our production process, we will literally make our factories made of glass where possible. So you can view everything that's going on there.
Transparency.
Yeah.
What the government needs to do. Be more transparent. Excellent point. Excellent. Silvery, by the way, another pun that you were talking about offline. So you can't meet the meat people. Remember that. Because that's like a shrouded in mystery. They don't want you to see the back end of those operations. I think let us say it because Varun doesn't want to be isolated in his stand against others. But I think that's. I want to just quickly ask before we go to the next one. So is Singapore the lead country then for this? Would you say, in terms of in the right
Singapore,
direction?
Yeah, Singapore, Israel, they're great test cases because these are smallish countries, very high tech. And then from a geopolitical standpoint, it makes sense for them to advance these industries. So, for example, Singapore currently only produces about 7 or 8% of their food locally. They import 92 to 93% of their food, which is it is a bit of a supply chain issue for them, right? So, in terms of advancing this space, creating a lot of jobs, continuing to be seen as like a technology center and a financial center, they've really supported this space in many ways. So what I mentioned earlier, regulation to allow cultivated meat for sale is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what they're doing. They've also, announced dozens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. We or our counterpart organization that I also supervise, called the GFI APAC organization in Singapore, has launched 2 university courses there. So you must have heard of universities like NUS, National University of Singapore, NTU, Nanyang Technological University. We've launched 2 courses to train the next generation of innovators there, all supported by the government. So there's a lot that they're doing, and we need to take that playbook for India, but we can do a lot more here with the agri side, with the manufacturing side. We can get a lot bigger here in terms of an industry.
Sorry, I just want to stop there for a second. Silvery was nodding very vigorously to the names of the 2 universities in Singapore. May you repeat both of them, please, sir? Silvery?
Nanyang, I know because firstly, it's a beautifully designed institute where.
Damn you, Silvery! You exposed me.
Joins I know some stuff, man.
Damn you! You don't have to go on now. The old man has been given his comeuppance. You back off and show respect to seniors.
Okay. I just made that up, Cyrus.
Let Varun let him take the things he wants. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, honestly, so like I said earlier, I'm seeing a lot of comments about availability and taste. So I just want to say that the bar is everyone in the comments. You are the bar in terms of this is the yardstick against which we want to measure the progress of this industry. Are the products literally tasting the same as what you want to eat, right? And until we get there, we aren't actually there in terms of science and technology. It's worth noting that everything wasn't there, right, when it came out. So solar energy wasn't there when it came out. The first smartphones were vastly worse than this, right? I think there's an opportunity here because we're talking about utilizing science for the betterment of something. We can get a lot better, and I think we've made a. Yeah, there you go. we can get a lot better. Yeah, it's a great point, right, Janil? How can I convince my mind to like Beyond Meat or other alternatives when they don't taste like meat at all? I think there are people, by the way, who work with cows all day long. People from like Minnesota,
Hey,
Missouri.
that's my family. It's just unfit. Stop that. Huh.
That wasn't pejorative at all. I'm saying there are people who work in the livestock industry who have written things like when they tasted the Impossible Whopper versus the regular meat Whopper. So a beef Whopper versus an Impossible Whopper, which is
Wait,
a
now
beef
I have to look
substitute.
up pejorative. Just guys, stop. Huh. Go on.
That wasn't insulting at all. That wasn't meant to be insulting, is what I'm saying. All I'm
Selvi, don't
saying,
act like you knew it. You got away with Singapore, but I know pejorative through you. This is not fair.
I mean,
I'm
now I
very-
can say I knew it, and there's no way for you to know the truth.
is there a
You
way? Is there a way for me to
bastard.
mute? Is there a way for me to mute Cyrus? Can you make me a co-host, please? But anyways,
I have the I have the
finish the thought.
infantile gene. Now you can't stop being an idiot from time to time. I'm so
finish the
sorry.
thought.
Please carry on.
No. To finish the thought, people who have tried that Impossible Whopper alongside a regular Whopper, and by the way, only the bun and the burger, taking out all the sauces and the lettuce and everything that could obscure the taste, and they work with livestock all the time. I've seen articles that they've written where they've said, look, beef, we have a problem, because I couldn't tell the difference now between these two things. So some products are getting much, much better, and that should be the yardstick, right? So people who eat meat all the time, you should be the yardstick. Look, obviously, by the way, there'll be a whole suite of products that do not taste like meat, that are not meant to taste like meat. Like you have your tofu, tempeh, all of that stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. That stuff is good too. I eat it from time to time. But we're talking about, for people who eat meat, we want to give you a substitute that doesn't break the planet, and a real
Varun,
substitute.
Varun, are there certain meats which are easier to replicate, like chicken maybe, or mutton maybe, like that?
Everything that's kind of ground meat is much easier to replicate, as you might guess from a scientific standpoint. Getting those like whole muscle fibers, like that, for example, that beautiful marbling that might exist in a steak, or like the how a chicken tears apart, etc. That's getting better and better, but it's harder to get to that point. So anything that's ground meat, keema, burgers, which are actually reconstituted ground meat that's turned into that shape. We actually had, and by the way, this is actually taking off across India, right? So we're seeing companies. There's a company called BVeg Foods that launched with Haldirams in North India a keema pao and a keema samosa. And by the way, it's quite cheap. So the keema pao is 45 rupees, and the keema
The day
samosa
has
is
come where
20.
Haldirams is selling me keema pao. I am a happy Indian.
It's
Giant.
it's so cool, right? Like it's just really cool. And obviously, look, maybe those products can get better too. But they're in 80 locations of Haldirams across North India. Not yet here. But yeah, so Cyrus, like I said, I think it's a great idea. The next show that we do, let's do it in the studio. I'd love to bring like maybe 5 products in and taste them. Yeah,
These guys who are listening, no, these guys, I think they'll be straight up about it. And I think you just want straight up. You don't want any emotions here. So let them be straight up, because that's the victory. Well, the moment people cross the line and say, okay, boom, this is it. I like it. You won. It's game, set, and match. Everybody's going to change. Who the hell won't change? I mean, you'll be living in some prehistoric mindset. That'll just disappear with time. We have people who believe homosexuality doesn't exist and all. What do you do? After some time, those people just disappear. All right, let's get in a few more.
Shovik,
Let Varun. Okay.
Shovik Bakshi has a great comment. He says, Cyrus went to the restaurant and asked for chicken legs. The waiter pointed out to Cyrus's own legs and said, "You already have them, sir."
Oh no!
All right, Shovik.
Always.
The only way I can change this, Varun is holding his mouth, trying not to laugh. How mean!
No,
You might as well.
Listen, I'm right there with you. Like I'm.
Listen, my quads are pretty impressive. They don't let me show my quads. What should I do? I mean, should I drop my pants right now? Shavik, where do you live? Can I come on a Friday evening and just do a little presentation wearing a Speedo? Because this is not correct. You're judging a man incorrectly. You have to see the aesthetics of the figure in its totality in the nude. So if your parents are okay with it and you don't mind me coming and doing a little parade, it'll hardly take 5 minutes, and maybe we'll open a packet of Haldirams together. Awkward moment. Nobody wants to say anything. Please do.
That's right.
No, sorry. I'm just looking at comments here.
Yeah. Next one is
let Varun take Silvery, because he's
Tanuj Taz Bhamri.
Yeah, who's my classmate from Bombay Scottish, by the way. Hi, Tanuj.
Oh wow.
Oh really?
Bombay Scottish School of Privilege.
Okay,
So
wow.
Varun
Wait,
had a
Bombay
very
Scottish
privileged
Hawaii or
background.
Bombay Scottish Worli?
Bombay Scottish Mahim, not Worli, which is about 2 minutes in that direction. I live pretty close.
Oh, okay, cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Hawaii came much later, Silvery. We were growing up.
I
There's
didn't
only one
know.
Bombay Scottish. Yeah, that's the Bombay
Yeah, I
Scottish.
know, that's what.
Yeah, I'm old as hell, is what Cyrus is saying.
Okay, I'm chicken
Uh,
legs, the fucking twits.
so Tanuj Tas Bhamri asks just a simple question. He says, "Can I invest in this?" So how would someone start investing in this space if they wanted to?
Oh,
Oh yeah, look, there are a couple of companies now that have gone public internationally, right? So Oatly, which makes oat milk and has been doing for 40 years and has kind of moved that part of the industry forward, is public on the New York Stock Exchange. So is Beyond Meat, is public on the New York Stock Exchange, and actually, we don't give investment advice, but if you look at the stock prices now, it might be a good time to invest now. If you are considering investing, please don't consider this advice.
or when you put it that way, I'm just thinking, what if this thing suddenly takes off? It
Yeah,
has the
absolutely.
potential to suddenly take off, and just everybody says, "Wow, I like this taste," and it's just word of mouth, and with the internet pushing the agenda, suddenly
Yeah.
the market will go through the roof. You would think, and if you came in early, we had a little money. I mean, hey, it's not the worst decision you could make. So
There
crypto
are like,
on the back foot, and now I move to investing in new meat, not clean meat,
there,
cultivated meats. Yeah.
there are other options that are more risky, like startup investments, etc. And the Indian space is picking up a lot, right? So we're seeing a few dozen companies getting into this space, and we've also set up funds now. So like investors getting into this space with specialized funds that are only investing in this space. So I think there's a lot. There are a lot of opportunities to do this, and they'll only continue to increase.
Silvery, please note this down with pen and paper for me later. I need to, because there are two spaces now available for good investments. One, of course, is
Yeah,
this cultivated meat, and the second is our podcast.
yeah.
I want to put some money on the table. I'll just remind me
Okay.
later, whatever happens.
All right.
I'm thinking that's not a bad punt. Just purely now that Mr. Bhambri brought it up, it's not the worst punt in the world. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Because this is what we're talking about when we look at something
Yeah.
that can really you look behind, at the back, or rewind a little bit in life, and you'll see what really went through the roof because it was like a whole cultural shift. If they had a cultural
Yeah.
shift, you're God. Somebody got paid 5,000 shares of Amazon, and then 20 years later, he's one of the 20 richest men in India, in America. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, it could actually come down to maybe like one product that excels, right? Like the Popeye chicken sandwich went suddenly like, oh my god, I gotta get that sandwich, right?
yeah,
So it could be that. It could be that just that
yeah,
one patty or that one product of
yeah,
plant-based meat which suddenly goes like super viral and everyone wants to have it, and that could
I'm buying
yeah.
Varun's
easily
company
escalate to
as
what
we
that.
speak. I am now the owner. Chicken Legs
You
is the
can't,
new name. You're
you can't buy our company. We don't have a company. It's a non-profit. But I will
I
say
can buy your intellectual capacity, and then I'll play with it.
that I'll give you
All
for
right.
free, sir. Come chill with you anytime
Okay.
with my
Come on, Varun.
supposed intellectual capacity.
Ignore me and get
Yeah.
a couple of nice
Yeah.
comments in quickly
So there
if we
are a couple
can.
of really nice questions here. So there's one question that says, "Will there be a Navratri special alternative meat?"
But
It's a
it's
good
funny.
example because
Yeah.
a lot of this is driven by, as I said earlier, the early adopters are people who already eat meat multiple times a week, who feel guilty about that meat consumption for various reasons, but they just don't have an alternative, right? Now at home, for instance, I don't live with my parents, but my mom is vegetarian on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Okay. So my dad is also vegetarian on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And he stopped complaining about it, but initially he used to, right? So if there's an opportunity to eat Tuesday, Saturday meat with no guilt, without that slaughter, without that animals, all of that stuff that relates to Hinduism or any religious guilt, etc. That's a great opportunity. As an example, Imagine Meats, which is Ritesh and Janilia's company, that has been in the works for about a year prior, actually ended up launching on Ganesh Chaturthi this year, which was I think October 14th, and that was very intentional. A couple of companies did launches on that day because the idea here is it's essentially guilt-free, slaughter-free meat. So whether you're guilty for the
Yeah.
environment or for animals or whatever, here's an alternative that you can try. Another question that's really good, I thought, was why call it meat in the first place? So that's an interesting one. I mean, like, look, every label that we have has come historically from somewhere, and they don't always mean what they think they mean. Like, for example, like there is something called milk of magnesia, which is not milk. There's something called coconut meat, which is not meat, right? Not meat as we conventionally understand it. The reason to call all of this stuff meat is just to give consumers an opportunity to understand what the purpose of it is. If you frame it correctly in terms of like, okay, this is my plant-based chicken substitute. The idea is that, okay, I need to swap it in for chicken, right? And of course, there will be kind of back and forth on this stuff culturally. But I think framing matters a lot in terms of positive perception. And oftentimes the things that we take for granted haven't always been that way anyway. It's like a recent invention. As an example, if I'm not mistaken, so this was like 80 or 100 years ago, But when avocados were first commercialized, they were called alligator pear, which was not doing so well in the market.
I like it better.
I mean, honestly, it sounds really cool to me, but it wasn't doing very well in the market. People were confused. What the hell is an alligator pear?
No, I'll tell you why the confusion. Because it could be a pair of alligators as well, and that scares the hell out of you. This is alligator pair or pair of alligators when you're ordering it online. I mean, imagine that.
Yeah. So, I mean, all the producers got together and they said, we need to rebrand this thing. It doesn't make any sense. And so, I mean, look, a lot of things matter in terms of how consumers perceive things. We want, ideally, for there to be clarity in terms of how things work. For consumers, as well as an understanding of what it is in terms of positive perception, etc. So that's why we call it meat, and frankly, it is meat from the perspective of taste. That's the whole point here.
Okay. Yeah, Cyrus,
Yeah,
you'd say
we
something?
take one more at least quickly.
Yeah. Let's do one more. This
Nice
one is
positive one, Silvery. I've
Yeah,
asked
this-
him enough controversial questions now. Nice, happy
okay.
ones.
This
Yeah.
one is a little okay. We'll see what Varun has to say. Harvesh Kasad asks, "Hello all. For the plant-based meat industry, how much does it come down to cause versus commerce?"
It's a great question. I think a lot of many to most, if not all of the entrepreneurs that have entered the space came in because they care about some cause, which could be the environment, animal welfare, etc. And some of them are in it because it's a cool, sexy space to be in, right? So I think it's
And hatred of
most
plants. Hate is also an important weapon.
Absolutely, hatred of plants. There you go. So I think there are multiple drivers to enter the space. It's a good question. We work with a diversity of like really wonderful entrepreneurs and people in large corporations. So you have people in animal meat companies who work with us and who share some of the same views from the perspective of sustainability, etc. They want to make meat better, right? So that's the idea here. And I would say if anyone in the audience is interested in entering the space, please get in touch with us. You can just email us at india@gfi.org, GFI as in Good Food Institute. And we would love to work. We have a huge number of resources, a startup manual, lots of technical resources on how to get started, a whole community, like lots of students, lots of entrepreneurs whom you can network with and get into the space.
Would you like a job there, Silvery?
I would. It'll be
I'm-
great,
I-
but
I'm,
Amit won't let me leave.
I'm hiring
You
him.
think so? Listen,
Hiring
he's
him away
hiring.
from you. I'm
Okay,
hiring him
interesting.
away from you.
Let me tell you, Silvery. Amit's very happy to let both of us go. Why are you worried?
Oh, then I'll jump on that opportunity with Silvery's
Well-
Singapore University credentials and
Oh, wow.
Cyrus's.
I bring nothing to the table, but with my legs, I'm sure we can do something. Maybe furniture. All right, last one.
Last one. Shruti, yes, has a very simple question, but very interesting. She says, "Does smart protein have a color code like green for veg or red for non-veg?"
It depends. So like the plant-based stuff is all green for veg. For cultivated meat, because it's made from animal cells, it would have to be classed as non-veg, and it would have to also say on the label that look, this is cultivated from cells. It's not made by animal slaughter, and that's fine. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing here, Varun? And this is coming back to veganism. I find this color thing almost like racism. That they put that dot here and that dot there, and they color it with a. It just makes you feel like you've been rejected because this is for certain people, this is not for you. I just get a negative energy from it. I know it sounds really puerile and all that, but I'm seriously saying that. I just feel it sounds militant when you're gonna do that.
Listen, no, it's a fair point. A lot of this does derive. I mean, there is a political history behind how all of this came about, but it does derive from food safety and just like making sure people don't eat stuff by mistake that they don't want to eat. A lot of that comes. So like, you have the FSSAI, the Food Safety Standards Authority of India, which, by the way, I have a lot of respect for that body. There's a few hundred people there who deal with food safety for this entire country of 1.354 billion people or whatever, right? So they get complaints from consumers who say, hey, like this person is marketing this thing. It has egg in it. I don't want to eat it. I'm pure vegetarian. And so then they have to take this on board and see how they can kind of regulate this and make it easier for people. So I think the red dot, yellow dot for egg.
Okay, I want to clarify this. This drives me nuts. There's no pure vegetarian. You're either vegetarian or non-vegetarian. If you eat anything that's non-vegetarian, you're non-vegetarian. Okay, that's it.
One second. Are you Indian? That's a crazy thing to say because we have this whole.
I wake up every morning hoping I'm not, but yes, I am.
There's this whole pure vegetarian. Then there's like Tuesday, Saturday. Then there's there's so much stuff. It's a whole spectrum.
Come on, what is this?
That's beautiful.
It's black and white. It's vegetarian or non-vegetarian. There's nothing in between.
No,
you can't say I'm
fair.
partially vegetarian and partial. What the?
That's
Really.
fair,
So,
but I mean, I think we should celebrate this diversity. I think it's beautiful, right? So, for example, in the US, Americans eat 3 beef burgers a week on average. That's crazy town. It's also highly homogenous. India is so diverse. You go 200 miles in one direction, you have a different dialect and a different cuisine, and
also in
that
India,
presents a
many
lot of
people are
opportunity.
starving. So that's also a great statistic. Like I'm having the 3 beef burgers and Mohan next to me is dying of hunger. C'est la vie, as we say in India.
I'm with you
Right?
on
So,
all of that. I'm with you on all of that. But the diversity does present some nice opportunities for people in our sector. For example, it's not you're not just making burgers and sausages. You're making biryanis, kebabs, different types of kebabs, tikkas, keemas, curries. There's so much stuff that you can make and kind of carve a space out for yourself in the market. Chettinad curries, this curry, that curry. It's beautiful. I think it's really fun and should be celebrated.
and I have to stop this podcast at this point because my aunt, who's vegetarian, has walked in. By the way, vegetarian by choice, huh? Born to a non-vegetarian family, vegetarian by choice, which I believe is the most beautiful thing. When you can do that absolutely by choice and cleanse yourself, I think that's a huge step. One day, hum honge kamyab. Varun, may I go? Thank you so much. In Oklahoma,
Please,
ordering
yeah.
Impossible Burger as we speak.
Wow.
Wow,
What the
that's
odds?
one
That's
huge
crazy.
point, bro.
Yeah.
That's the power of the
No, you
podcast.
convinced. Yeah,
Not
you
me.
convinced Girish
Yeah.
Patel. It seems like. Yeah.
In Oklahoma, as we speak, he's saying he's doing it. I think that's you got to clap for that. That's fabulous.
That's pretty cool.
That's
Really cool.
fantastic.
Cool.
What a good way to end. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, boys. See you
Thank
later.
you so much.
All right, Cyrus.
Two
Thank you so
alligator
much.
pair alligator. All right. Bye.
See you guys.
See
Bye.
ya. Hi, Olga. Sorry.